Hey guys, this is Illusion PODFIC, and today we're going to be reading Green Through and Through by Another Fucking Robin. This is Chapter 16. When Peter shows up to school the next day, he is definitively lisp-free. All it took was eating 6 chili dogs and a shit ton of chips. Luckily, the food that Red had left on the rooftop was enough. He did not need to show up to school with a speech impediment. No way. Peter wants to have a normal day of avoiding Edison Bright, shoveling food into his face, and maybe seeing Duke again. Peter shakes himself. No. It's best if he never sees Duke again. He doesn't think he could handle more guilt in his gut or blood on his hands. And that's what happens to people who befriend Peter Parker. They get turned into a cautionary tale. The protest of the Avengers bounced around in his school, but he ignores them. If they even knew him at all, then they were all friends with Spider-Man first, not Peter Parker. Peter is friends with Harry. Harry, who had been his best friend since diapers. Harry, who is the person who knows him the best in the world. Harry, who has a burning hatred for the mask that has become Peter's second face because he thinks Spider-Man ruined his life, and he's not wrong. He's friends with Gwen. Gwen, who he couldn't save from falling from the rooftop. Gwen, who he couldn't look in the eye because he's the reason she's in a wheelchair. Peter's friends with MJ, who can't seem to make up her mind if she even likes him or not, hanging around in the periphery of his life, an act of caution he is endlessly grateful for. Peter Parker is friends with Ned. Ned, who has boundless enthusiasm for everyone and everything. Peter is waiting with bated breath for the day where his presence will ruin his life too. It's not that Peter doesn't love and fiercely protect his friends, because he does. He loves and misses them so much that he might just crumble if he thinks about it too hard. But he can't deny that on top of the mountain of grief, there is a veneer of relief. Peter Parker can't ruin their lives if Peter Parker is gone. It's cold comfort, but it is one of the few comforts he has about his situation, and he grips it tightly to his chest, like it is the only thing that keeps him afloat in his tempest of debilitating loneliness and heartache. So when Duke runs up to him and immediately pulls him into a complicated handshake, he is simultaneously able to breathe again and crushed by guilt. He hopes this universe is not as cruel as his old one, even though he knows that he could never be that lucky. Duke sees Peter from across the parking lot, standing like Atlas with the weight of the world on his shoulders and surrounded by a swirling haze of orange. Duke decides in that moment to completely abandon the espionage mission that his idiot siblings have been trying to rope him into, and to instead do what his new family, minus maybe Cass, is far too emotionally constipated to do, and actually befriend the guy. He jogs over and pulls Peter into a handshake that he somehow preemptively knows, probably part of his meta abilities, because Peter is clearly a meta. Well, it's probably not super clear to anyone who isn't Duke, but that doesn't really matter, because Duke is Duke. And as much as he could see the way the air got wavy and distorted around his head when Edison slammed his fist into Peter's desk yesterday, and he could see the trace of radiation oozing into the air around him, and even if Duke didn't have his abilities, he'd have felt how Peter's hand remained limp when he went to shake Peter's hand when they met, officially, yesterday. How despite waving it around enthusiastically, he had never actually grabbed Duke's hand back. So to summarize, Peter Parker is not only undead, but also a thoroughly haunted meta with precognitive abilities and at least a little super strength, a walking trauma goldmine, and, unfortunately for his privacy and Tim's, already non-existent, sleep schedule, also the perfect starter kit for a future rogue. Oh, and when Duke says thoroughly haunted, he doesn't mean it in a battle-scarred war veteran way, though that is there, just not what he was referring to. No, Duke means it in a Ghostbusters way. It was hard to see past Tim and through the crowds at the entrance exam because it was blatantly obvious yesterday, and now, the orange that surrounds him isn't an aura, but freaking ghosts. There are always 2 at his shoulders, a large muscular man in a ripped hoodie with a frightening resemblance to Luke Fox, and a lithe guy in a suit. They follow Peter wherever he goes, whispering words that Duke can't hear in his ears, and ruffling his hair, not actually affecting the mortal plane. Thank fuck. Duke really doesn't need that in his life, but he guesses it's the thought that counts. Sometimes there are more, but they're considerably harder to see and only solidify enough to actually notice when they talk to Peter, which isn't often. Duke isn't gonna lie, he's insanely curious. Are they real people that Peter can communicate with telepathically? Are they projections he can create subconsciously? Are they dead people's ghosts that he can communicate with? If so, did he know them when they were alive, or are they just taunting him for funsies? But the spirits, projections, ghosts don't seem malevolent or mischievous. Peter doesn't even seem to be aware of them most of the time, so it's really none of his business, and, more importantly, none of his family's business either. That's the decision Duke had come to last night, because despite the incredible nosiness of the bats, this isn't their right to know unless Peter tells them himself. Duke is loyal to his weird vigilante family, but he's also a metahuman, and will stand in solidarity with Peter and keeping his abilities a secret. Bruce is just going to have to deal with it. Duke, Peter says, somewhat startled, pulling him out of his thoughts. Are you okay? What? What? Why wouldn't I be? Peter's about to say something when one of his ghosties, a bald man with an eye patch, pinches the bridge of his nose and sighs loudly. Not that Duke can actually hear the ghosties. Unfortunately, just because Duke can see more wavelengths of light and into different planes of reality, it doesn't mean he can hear into them. However, this ghost is pretty clear about his exasperation. He says something and Peter's eyes stray slightly to the left of Duke's face while he listens in. He suddenly shakes himself back to reality and looks at Duke's face. No reason. I just thought you'd hang around with your friends before school started. At least 4 of his fainter ghost face palm and the 2 by his shoulders look fondly resigned, the taller one shaking his head slightly. Well, for one, you are my friend. My only one, too. My foster siblings don't count, and even if they did, Tim's been insufferable since he started this project. I think he's running on minus hours of sleep, undiluted caffeine, and spite. Steph is a fucking chaos gremlin who enjoys convincing Tim into his less sane, sleep-deprived impulses and filming them, which is energy I don't need with the clock still saying AM. Peter snorts, and the fainter ghosts fade entirely, filling Duke with the odd sense of pride. And Cass is great, but she spends most of her time in the library reading, and that is too far away from my first class to be convenient. Plus, we have history first, so we might as well hang out and walk to class together, right? He says, with what he hopes is an easygoing smile. Peter's shoulders somewhat stiffen and relax at the same time, and Duke wishes that he roped Cass into plan befriend Zombie Boy. Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, class, settle down. That includes you, Mr. Bright, okay? Mr. Gulliford takes a deep breath. You may have noticed that you had a supply teacher last lesson. That's because my wife is a guard at Arkham. The class collectively winces. Well, everyone but Peter, but he's new to Gotham. He'll learn fast enough. And was injured in Joker's recent breakout. Because of this, I can't be bothered to do a proper lesson today. So instead, I'll give each of you an easy assignment. Write an essay arguing who is the most useful Justice League member and why. And have your papers on my desk by next Monday. A collective groan. They make everyone do this every year. Peter looks around in confusion and nervousness. Duke assumes it's residual amnesia from the Lazarus pit. Everyone and their mother has written at least 2 JLA essays before. Duke leans over to Peter and whispers, "Don't worry, I'll help you out. No man left behind, right?" Peter relaxes and whispers, "Thanks." Mr. Gulliford walks over to his desk and props his feet up on the table, chatting with 2 boys at the front of the class about the most recent Gotham Knights game where they thrashed the Boston Colonials 7-0. Duke turns his attention to Peter. Have you really never done a JLA essay before? What? I never said that. I eat JLA essays. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Duke raises an unimpressed eyebrow and Peter flashes a wholly unconvinced smile. Okay, who are you going to write about? Probably Batman? Peter stretches out the symbol like he's afraid he said the wrong answer. Good, because he has. Duke groans. Ugh, that's such a basic bitch answer. Everyone and their grandma is going to write about frickin' Batman, he pouts. What's the problem with Batman? He's just overrated. Signal is way better. Oh, I agree, but I didn't think he was part of the League. He isn't, unfortunately, Duke says, crossing his arms as he leans back into his chair, before suddenly processing Peter's words, doing an exaggerated double take and grasping onto the table to stop himself from falling. Wait, you agree about Signal? I mean, yeah, I haven't been in Gotham long, but Signal is the only day hero, which is dumb, but whatever. And the only meta, I respect the guy a lot. Batman is kind of notoriously a bigot about metas, which is really messed up, but I'm not going to fist fight the freaking Batman over it, no matter how much I disagree, you know? Anyways, I think he's a great role model for all the meta kids in Gotham, and Duke, are you okay? I know I ramble, but yeah, I'm good, man. I'm good. Duke is a very much not good. Is Signal really that important? Is he? Sure, Duke wishes that he had a meta hero in Gotham to look up to instead of idolizing the Central City hero when he started developing his powers. But is he really that hero for kids? Him? He hasn't even been Signal for a full year yet, and Peter isn't even from Gotham. The vigilante scene is pretty dry in New York, but surely it's not that dry. Are you sure? You're kind of spacing out on me, Peter says with an awkward laugh. Duke snaps out of his thought and claps Peter on the shoulder. 100%, my friend. Now let's help you pick a hero that isn't boring old Batsy. In the end, Peter decides to write about Martian Manhunter, Apparently he was really interested by his treatment by the public and media when contrasted by the treatment of human passing heroes like Superman. Duke decides to follow Peter's example and write a similar essay about Shara and Diana. By the time the bell rings, Duke's respect for Peter has grown immensely. Not because of the unintentional flattery, well, okay, maybe a little. He has a deep understanding of law surrounding meta rights, and is incredibly sympathetic and understanding towards metas with more physical changes, which is rare, even within the community. It wouldn't surprise him at all if his guardian was a meta human rights lawyer instead of a defense attorney. It makes Duke feel all icky that he knows Peter's guardian's job without Peter telling him himself, but he can't unlearn that now, so instead decides to not humor Tim's rants anymore. Crappity! You okay, Pete? He turns to the seat next to him, where Peter was just moments before, only for him to be gone, and for his voice to be coming from the doorway on the other side of the room. Sorry, Duke, I've got to go to calc in the other building, bye! Duke watches the scrawny boy sprint away from the door. Good, there's no way he'll get to the math block on time, but he might just arrive before they finish the starter questions of e-book set. He shakes his head, packing away a pencil case before a thought strikes him. Peter's going to calculus. Tim's second lesson today is calc. He laughs fondly and mutters under his breath, Good luck, Pete. Timothy Drake is great at many things, but he likes to think that his observation skills are his greatest asset. And Tim can observe a lot of things from the boy who had just rushed into his classroom and sat beside him. His hair is a white streak, like the cameras had shown him, except now it looks like he's purposely tried to blend it in with the rest of his wavy brown hair, white curls poking out of the bangs that fell over his eyes in such a way that it would look like a weird light reflection to anyone who didn't know better. Another thing is his eye color, startlingly green with the tiniest ring of amber around his iris, leaving Tim wondering what color his eyes were before. Both are obvious side effects of the resurrection via Lazarus pit. Tim notices other things about him too, the way his shirt is a cool gray with rounded cuffs instead of a clean white and square cuffs. How his shoes are double-laced because they're too big and decorated with scuff marks that predate his emergence in Crime Alley when he was pointedly barefoot. How his shirt is wrinkled but not lumpy over his forearm, even though Damien had said that he'd suffered a bullet graze there only 10 days ago, and by all right should still be bandaging the wound. How he flinches a lot. How he is incredibly polite with how he addresses both students and facility. How he rubs his thumbnails together absent-mindedly when he sits down, and promptly stops as soon as he notices. How high he piled his plate last lunch. It does not paint a pretty picture, and Tim can't stop looking. His family often likes to poke fun at him for his penchant for caffeine and his seemingly non-existent sleep schedule, but the tales of his insomnia and coffee addiction are greatly exaggerated. Because while he does stay awake longer than is probably healthy and does indulge in caffeine to aid him in this, those habits only really rear their heads out of frustration, and it is safe to say that Tim is currently frustrated. He's been scouring every source he can find, tracking down every lead in an attempt to find something, anything, about the boy to his right, but he can't find jack shit, and it's pissing him off. Peter Benjamin Parker is just a kid. One kid with a history of school records, with parents who have death certificates, with a guardian who has bank statements. No matter how hard Tim digs, everything about the boy is frustratingly normal. Way too normal for a kid who's been in a Lazarus pit. But Tim can't find anything. How can Tim be so observant yet so blind? He knows that there's some mistake, some obvious piece of information that's staring him in the face, but he can't find it and it's driving him crazy. Tim wants to help, and he can't help if he doesn't know what's wrong. So Tim resorts to watching and noticing and noting. He's content to stay that way, that is until Peter finishes the double-sided calc sheet in a whole 2 minutes into the lesson. Tim shouldn't stare. He's been so covert so far, but goddamn that was fast. Sure, Tim also just finished his work, but Tim is Red Robin. Tim has been solving murders and cracking cases since he was 13. Peter's just some kid. Some zombie kid with good grades, sure, but not vigilante-level intelligence. What? Do you want to compare notes? Shit. He's been caught. Cover story. He needs one of those. Why is his brain running 1,000,000 times faster than his body and somehow also lagging comically far behind this conversation? Yeah! Crap. That was too loud. The room was quiet. Now everyone's staring at him. Look away, please. Tim doesn't have a mask to hide behind. Please look away. Peter breaks into a grin and places his paper between them for Tim to see. Here you go. Fair warning, though, I get really bored and use some convoluted formula. Tim glances down and sees immediately that he's right. Peter decided to use long multiplication and division, write everything down to an absurd amount of decimal places, write down the proofs for every formula he used, and then give the answer to an insane degree of accuracy. Tim wouldn't have been too impressed except Peter hadn't taken out a calculator. And by the looks of his uniform, he probably doesn't own one. As if that wasn't enough, he had seemingly gotten bored and started doodling pendulum equations in the margins. This is insane. You must be a genius. Thanks, man. Your answers are also alright, so you must be a genius too. Tim finds himself mimicking Peter's smile on his own face. Yeah, I guess you're right. Alright guys, now that's the end of chapter 16 of Green Through and Through by Another Fucking Robin. I hope you guys liked it, and I'll see you next chapter.